The Gulf of Oman is the last body of water before the open ocean. That is not a poetic description. It is an operational one. For any vessel transiting the Strait of Hormuz and turning southeast, the Gulf of Oman is the transition zone between the confined, shallow, politically explosive waters of the Persian Gulf and the deep blue of the Arabian Sea, where the ocean opens and the tactical picture spreads, and the geometry of naval confrontation shifts from the claustrophobic to the expansive. For the Iranian Navy, not the IRGC Navy, the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy, the conventional naval force with blue water pretensions and a doctrine that has been evolving since the humiliation of Operation Praying Mantis in 1988, when the United States Navy destroyed half of Iran's surface fleet in a single day. The Gulf of Oman is the edge of their serious operational range. It is where their most capable ships operate when they want to demonstrate that they are something more than a coastal defense force. It is where they go when they need to be seen. The IRIN's acquisition of domestically produced surface combatants over the past decade represented a genuine, if incremental, increase in capability. The frigate Sahand, named for the destroyer that was sunk by American forces in 1988, a naming choice that is its own form of institutional memory, was commissioned in 2018 after years of domestic development, displacing approximately 1,400 tons, armed with anti-ship missiles, a naval gun, and surface-to-air missiles of domestically developed design. The destroyer Dena followed in 2022, a more capable platform, approximately 1,900 tons, with an updated weapons suite that incorporated lessons from Iranian naval development programs that had been running continuously for 3 decades. Neither vessel was a match for an Arleigh Burke destroyer in any objective technical comparison. But that was not the point. The point was that they existed, that they were capable of sustained blue water operations, and that deploying them aggressively in the Gulf of Oman against an American carrier strike group transiting Hormuz created a narrative of Iranian naval relevance that had domestic political value, patron relationship value with Moscow and Beijing, and operational intelligence value, regardless of how the encounter resolved. It was a Sunday. The time was 11:33 local. The Gulf of Oman was running with a moderate southwest swell, the sky partially overcast, visibility approximately 15 miles. Good enough for optical systems, restricted enough that the haze at the horizon created a visual ambiguity that Iranian naval doctrine traditionally tried to exploit. A United States Navy carrier strike group had completed its eastbound transit of the Strait of Hormuz 40 minutes earlier and was now in the northwestern Gulf of Oman, course southeast, speed 16 knots. The carrier's flight deck cycling through a standard operational air wing launch that had begun before the group cleared the strait. The transit had been routine. The strait was behind them. The open ocean was ahead. The contacts appeared at 11:19. Before the watch officer in the CIC had flagged them to the captain, before the ESM system had completed its initial classification, they were already there on the surface search radar. 2 contacts bearing 255, range 47 miles, course northeast at 23 knots, course northeast. The strike group was heading southeast at 16 knots, 2 contacts at 23 knots on a northeast course. from bearing 255 were on an intercept track. The geometry was elementary. A junior officer running the numbers in his head could see it. The ESM system confirmed the classification at 11:24. IRIN surface combatants. Specifically, the radar emission profile of the Sahand's Aselsan fire control system and the Dena's Shahab 124 air search radar. Both profiles in the library, both previously cataloged from surveillance collection during Iranian naval exercises in this exact operating area. The two most capable surface combatants in the Islamic Republic of Iran Navy were at 47 miles northeast bearing, closing at a combined approach speed that would put them in visual range of the strike group within approximately 90 minutes. The watch officer reached for his headset. Captain CIC. Two IRIN surface contacts assessed Sahand and Dena, bearing 255, 47 miles. Intercept course at 23 knots. No radio contact established. Request your presence. The captain arrived in the CIC at 11:27. She had been in the carrier's flag spaces, reviewing the morning intelligence summary. A summary that had mentioned elevated IRIN activity in the Gulf of Oman over the preceding 72 hours, without specifying the current contacts, which had apparently departed their Bandar Abbas anchorage in the early morning hours and been tracked by surveillance assets since 0815. The intelligence summary had assessed increased probability of an IRIN harassment operation against the transit. The assessment had been accurate. She studied the tactical display for a long moment, tracking the two contact icons and their course projections. At 23 knots on a northeast course, the Sahand and Dena would close to approximately 18 miles of the strike group's position if nobody altered course. Close enough for their anti-ship missiles to have valid solutions. Close enough for their crews to conduct the kind of visual and photographic documentation that Iranian naval doctrine prized as an intelligence product. Close enough for the encounter to generate the imagery and narrative that Tehran would use in its domestic and international media within hours of the event. "What's our P8 status?" the captain asked. "The P8 is currently 210 miles southeast, ma'am. Repositioning to support within 65 minutes. Not fast enough to be useful in the early phase." She looked at the screen. "What about overhead collection?" "NRO pass in approximately 40 minutes. RC-135 is available to the north." She nodded. "Get the RC-135 repositioned. I want full collection on both IRIN vessels, every emission, every data link, everything they're transmitting to shore. I want to know who they're talking to." The RC-135V rivet joint, operating in international airspace north of the Gulf of Oman, began its repositioning at 11:31. It would be in optimal collection range within 18 minutes. Whatever the Sahand and Dena were transmitting to the IRIN Shore Command at Bandar Abbas, to any other Iranian assets in the area, to the intelligence services that were almost certainly watching this operation unfold through their own collection means, would be captured. At 11:36, the contacts crossed the 40-mile threshold, and the ESM system picked up a new emission from the Sahand. Her fire control radar, operating in search mode, not a lock. The Sahand's fire control system, in search mode, was painting the entire sector ahead of it, building a targeting picture. It was the same gesture that the IRGC fast boats made with their radars in the Gulf. A demonstration of capability, not an act of war, but a deliberate signal that the weapons aboard the Iranian vessel were awake and oriented. "Log the fire control emission," the captain said. "Time, frequency, bearing. It goes in the report." She turned to the surface warfare coordinator. "What is the CPA projection at current courses and speeds?" 18.4 miles, ma'am. Timeline approximately 83 minutes. 18 miles. The Noor anti-ship missile carried by both IRIN vessels had a published range of approximately 170 kilometers. 18 miles was well within that envelope, but published range and effective employment range in a contested environment against a defended target were two different numbers. The strike group's layered air defense, the cruiser's Aegis system, the destroyer's standard missiles, the carrier's own CIWS systems, and the F/A-18S that could be airborne within minutes, created a defensive picture that compressed the Iranian missile's effective threat range considerably. The Sahand and Dena could launch at 18 miles. Whether anything they launched would reach a target was a different question. And the answer to that question was not in Tehran's favor. The captain understood this. She also understood that the Sahand and Dena understood this, that their commanders were not planning to shoot, and that the fire control radar emission was theater, not preparation. What they were planning was exactly what they were doing: closing, documenting, transmitting, and creating a public record of Iranian warships operating aggressively in proximity to an American carrier, which was the operational objective, regardless of what happened next. The correct response to theater was not alarm. It was professionalism, documentation, and the measured escalation of visible capability that communicated without ambiguity that the theater had an audience that was considerably better informed than the performers might prefer. At 11:44, the captain made her first active decision: launch the Alert Seahawk. I wanted positioned ahead of the formation at 2,000 feet, FLIR running, course toward the IRIN contacts. Standard intercept geometry. It is not to close within 3 miles of either vessel without my order. Visible and professional. The MH-60R lifted from the flight deck at 11:47 and climbed to altitude, banking southwest toward the two Iranian vessels. In the CIC, its track appeared as a blue icon moving steadily toward the intercept bearing. At 2,000 feet with its FLIR running, the helicopter would have clear optical and thermal imagery of both IRIN vessels from 15 miles. Images that would capture hull condition, weapons posture, deck activity, crew positions, and everything else that made up the intelligence value of a close-range naval surveillance operation. Iran was not the only navy that collected intelligence during these encounters. At 11:52, the RC-135V's collection began feeding into the strike group's intelligence picture. What the signals analysts saw confirmed the operational framework. The Sahand and Dena were transmitting continuously to the IRIN fleet headquarters at Bandar Abbas, providing real-time position reports and situational updates. They were also receiving data from an Iranian signals intelligence asset that appeared to be tracking the carrier strike group's own emissions and relaying that information to the two ships. The encounter was being watched and directed from shore. That knowledge was itself operationally significant. It meant that whatever decisions the Sahand and Dena made were not being made autonomously by their commanding officers. They were being made in consultation with a shore command that was monitoring the situation in real time and had the authority to escalate or de-escalate based on political as well as military factors. The Sahand and Dena were instruments of a decision being made in Tehran, not by their COS alone. At 12:04, with the contacts at 31 miles and closing, the second development in the tactical picture occurred. The Dena increased speed from 23 to 27 knots. The acceleration was noted by the CIC watch team within 60 seconds. At 27 knots, the Dena's CPO projection tightened from 18 miles to 14. It was pulling ahead of the Sahand, which maintained its 23-knot approach, creating a separation between the two vessels that placed them on slightly different vectors. The Dena was going for a closer CPA. The Sahand was holding the wider approach, potentially to serve as a surveillance and support platform, while the Dena closed. In the CIC, the geometry tightens. Captain, Dena has increased to 27 knots. CPA now projecting 14 miles. The captain looked at the updated projection. 14 miles. Still outside the range at which engagement became an immediate concern. But the acceleration was a message, a deliberate increase in pressure, a test of whether the strike group's response would change when the approach became more aggressive. It would change proportionately. At 12:09, the captain authorized the launch of two FA-18F Super Hornets from the carrier's flight deck. Alert 5, already manned and engines running, they were airborne within 4 minutes, climbing to altitude and turning southwest under the guidance of the E-2D Hawkeye that had been airborne since before the transit began. The Super Hornets climbed to 20,000 feet and held a position 30 miles southwest of the carrier, between the carrier and the approaching IRIN vessels. Visible on every radar that was looking, unmistakably present. Two Super Hornets at 20,000 feet told the Sahand and Dena something very specific. It told them that the air above them was no longer uncontested. It told them that the strike group had airborne assets overhead with sensors and weapons that could see everything happening on their decks. And it told them specifically that the strike group had chosen to respond to the Dena's acceleration by putting strike aircraft in the sky, not by launching them toward the IRIN vessels, not by activating fire control radar, but by placing them where they were visible and present and undeniable. At 12:14, the communications officer transmitted on Channel 16 in English and Farsi. IRIN vessels, Sahand and Dena. This is a United States Navy carrier strike group operating in international waters in the Gulf of Oman. You are approaching on a course and profile that creates navigational safety concerns. You are advised to maintain a minimum distance of 15 nautical miles from this formation. You have been identified by name. Your emissions and movements have been tracked since your departure from Bandar Abbas this morning and are being recorded and transmitted to United States Naval Forces Central Command. All interactions are being documented. We recommend professional conduct in accordance with Colregs and the 1972 Incidents at Sea Agreement. The transmission was factual precise, and designed to tell the IRIN commanders exactly what the strike group knew: that the tracking had begun before dawn, that their identity was confirmed, that shore commands on the American side had the full picture. That level of transparency was itself a message. It said, "There are no surprises here. Everything you are doing has been anticipated, prepared for, and is being documented in a form that will be permanent." The Sahand responded on Channel 16 at 12:17. In Farsi, its transmission was translated by the destroyer's specialist within 40 seconds. The Sahand's message claimed that the IRIN vessels were conducting lawful naval operations in international waters and demanded that the American carrier strike group maintain distance from the Iranian vessels. It was a formulaic response, the kind of message that IRIN Command had scripted for exactly this type of encounter, designed to create a parallel paper record that Iranian media could reference. The captain dictated a one-line reply, transmitted immediately. "Oh, we note your transmission. We are in international waters and will maintain our course and speed. All interactions continue to be recorded." 7 seconds of airtime. Sufficient. Complete. At 12:23, the Seahawk pilot reported that the Dena had activated a camera platform on her bridge wing. A crew member with what appeared to be a professional video camera recording the helicopter's orbit. The IRIN was documenting the encounter. The strike group was documenting the encounter. Both sides were building the record simultaneously in a parallel process that would produce two very different narratives of the same event, depending on which side's footage was presented, in what context, to which audience. The captain noted the camera activity and logged it. "Make sure our FLIR has clear imagery of the camera crew," she said. "I want it documented that they were documenting us." At 12:31, the Dena reached her closest point of approach, 13.7 miles, slightly closer than the projected 14, achieved at a speed that had briefly touched 29 knots before the navigator apparently made a course adjustment that produced the final CPA number, 13.7 miles. The crew on the Dena's bridge could see the carrier through binoculars. The Super Hornets overhead were clearly visible from deck level. The Seahawk was orbiting at 2,000 feet, its FLIR capturing everything. For approximately 4 minutes, the tactical picture held this geometry. The Dena at 13.7 miles, the Sahand at 17, the carrier and its escorts continuing southeast at 16 knots, the Super Hornets orbiting at altitude, the Seahawk between the formation and the IRIN vessels. 4 minutes of maximum proximity, maximum documentation, maximum mutual awareness. At 12:35, the Dena began to fall off. Not dramatically. A course change of 8 degrees that, extended over time, would open the range rather than maintain it. The speed reduced from 29 knots to 22. The CPA projection, which had been holding at 13.7, began to migrate outward. 14 miles, 15, 16. The Sahand made a corresponding course adjustment 3 minutes later. By 12:54, both IRIN vessels were on courses that were clearly opening, turning northwest, back toward the Hormuz direction, their tracks showing the beginning of the return passage that would take them back to Bandar Abbas, having accomplished the operational objective: close approach, documentation, transmission to shore. the generation of footage and data that Tehran would use. But the American record was also complete. The RC-135V had captured every transmission the two ships had made since 1131. The Seahawk FLIR had hours of clear imagery of both vessels at close range. The Super Hornets' own sensors had tracked and recorded the approach profiles. The E-2D had the complete tactical picture from first contact to resolution. The communications log contained the Channel 16 exchange. The ESM suite had the full frequency and emissions profile of both ships. What Tehran would show its domestic audience and its patrons was footage of IRIN warships operating near an American carrier. Proof of Iranian naval relevance and courage. What NAVCENT and Fifth Fleet and the intelligence services of every allied nation would have was something considerably more detailed. A complete operational record of how the IRIN's two most capable surface combatants performed in a real blue water confrontation, what their commanding officers decided under pressure, what their shore command directed, how their sensors behaved, and how their ships handled at speed. An intelligence harvest so comprehensive that every future IRIN deployment in these waters would be slightly more transparent, slightly more predictable, and slightly less able to generate the ambiguity that gray zone coercion depends on. The captain watched the IRIN contact tracks open to 20 miles, then to 25, before she spoke. A full reconstruction, timeline from initial contact at 11:19 to departure. Every emission, every course and speed change, every transmission, theirs and ours. RC-135 collection product goes directly to Navy sent intelligence with a request for expedited processing. I want the incidents at sea agreement compliance analysis in the package, specifically the fire control radar activation at 11:36. She looked at the watch team. Good documentation, she said. In these waters, in these encounters, that was the mission. They had executed it. She left the CIC at 13:07. The carrier's flight operations continued. The Gulf of Oman opened ahead of the strike group, widening into the Arabian Sea with its deep water and its open sky. Behind them, the Sahand and the Dena were heading home, their cameras full of footage and their commanders writing their reports to Bandar Abbas. In the permanent competition between a navy that projects power through capability and restraint and a navy that projects relevance through presence and narrative, both sides had generated their record on this Sunday morning. One record would appear on Iranian state television within 24 hours, cut to patriotic music, narrated as a demonstration of IRIN courage and commitment. The other record would sit in classified archives in Manama and Pearl Harbor and Washington, available to anyone with the right clearance and a need to understand exactly what Iran's two most capable warships can and cannot do when they encounter the full weight of American naval professionalism in the waters where it operates every day. Both records existed. Only one of them was complete.